Welcome to another episode of Bright Headed Publishing Podiobook Book Club. Today I had the pleasure of welcoming our newest book club member, Shane Wilson. Shane is not only an author, but he's also a fellow podcaster. He came on the show today to talk about his 3 books, The Boy Who Kissed the Rain, A Year Since the Rain, and The Smoke in His Eyes. He shares his writing journey, and he even gave the right answer to my Godfather question. So you're still in the book club, Shane. Welcome. Welcome to the podcast and to the book club, our newest member, author Shane Wilson. Shane, thank you so much for being here today with me on the podcast, being a member of the book club, the newest member, I should say, of the book club. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I just want to say that the hazing to become a member of the book club was unexpectedly troubling, but I'm happy to make it through, and I'm glad to be a member.
You know, not everybody makes it through the hazing phase, so I'm glad to see you.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It is tough to be a member of this book club. Yeah, so welcome. I'm glad when you get to this stage, you know that you've made it, right?
That's right. Yeah. Now I get to haze the other new members, right?
Absolutely. Kudos to you. So I'm so glad you're here today to talk about your books. You're a 3-time published author, which I think is impressive for anybody who's published. You've got 3 books out there. Some people struggle just to get the 1. So congratulations. And we'll probably end up talking about all of them. But before we go there, I want to learn more about Shane, the author, and your journey to becoming an author. So did you always know that this is what you wanted to do, that you wanted to write and publish books?
I remember wanting to write stories for a very long time. Even as a child, when I was a kid, I was really fascinated with film, and I thought I would maybe do like screenplays and that kind of thing. I remember I had my parents got me a video camera when I was in middle school. I was making my own movies and writing my own scripts and stuff. But even before that, when I was in elementary school, I would write short stories, and I would put them in those 3-prong folders, and I would draw cover art and glue it on the front and let people read it. And even when I was making movies, I would like copy them on VHS tapes, and I would make cover art and I would rent them to people in the neighborhood. So like I was always a hustler, you know. But yeah, I even when I was a little kid, my parents bought me a typewriter when I couldn't even spell words yet, and I used it to practice spelling. I would have my mom, I would ask my mom like the hardest words I could think of to spell, like rhinoceros. That's the word that I always remember asking her to spell for me, and then I would like peck the letters out as she told them. And so it was just very ingrained in me that writing and storytelling has always been a part of who I was. So I don't know that I knew that I wanted to pursue it in any kind of professional sense, but I think a lot of that just kind of happened by accident.
Well, it sounds like creating and telling stories is something that you love, and that's the goal, right? To be able to do what you love for a living. I mean, so...
Yeah, well, and I'm lucky that I teach English to college students, which means that I get to do creative writing classes and literature classes. So yeah, so even though the books don't pay the bills yet, right, I still get to wake up every day and go to work and talk about stories, which is, I think, very cool.
Yeah, I love stories too. I love film as well. I love books that are converted to film. Because I love to look at the contrast of the story, right? It fascinates me.
Adaptation is really interesting as an art form. And that honestly, and I'm not trying to like shoehorn one of my books in here, but that's the story behind the 3rd book. It's really an adaptation of one of my short stories into a stage play. That's not even a novel. I wrote a stage play based on one of the short stories that I had written a number of years ago. And just as a thought experiment.
And so that's interesting to me. So how different is the process to write a play than it is to write a short story?
Well, it's I think that I made it harder on myself than I had to, because it would have made a lot more sense to take a 18-page short story and turn that into a one-act play. But I decided to take an 18-page short story and turn it into a full-length 2-act, story. And so what I ended up having to do is I had to live in that world a lot more, right? And I had to discover other characters that were not in the original story, and I had to really flesh out the setting and all of this. The short story, the book is called The Boy Who Kissed the Rain. The short story really does focus just on 2 characters. It's a very Romeo and Juliet kind of story. 2 people from very different lives that shouldn't be together, but are, or try to be anyway, right? And so the short story really does focus on them and the male character's immediate family. The play, though, really explores the town, right, that they live in. There's a lot of other characters there. You get a lot more of the family life. You get a lot more of the other citizens of this little town. So yeah, I think it's really just writing the play was a lot like what writing a novel would have been like, right? Because I had to really populate that world to make that story compelling for that long.
So did you ever actually put on the play?
Yeah, so what's really cool is I submitted that to a local theater reading series, and it was accepted and staged. It was the last thing I did in public before the pandemic shut everything down, was a staged reading. It wasn't a full production, but they had a director and they had lighting and some light costuming stuff. And we did it in this very small venue, very intimate setting. It was a packed house. It was very cool to see my characters come to life, And the goal was to take that cast and director and put up a full production of that show last summer, but we know what happened, right? But that's still on the docket. That's still a goal to do, because I think that that cast was really great, and as long as they're all still around, I think we'll probably get that done in the next couple of years.
So how was that, to have somebody take your play and bring it to life, and you're not the director, you're not in the play, you're just kind of watching it? How did you convey what you saw to what they put on? Yeah. How involved were you in that process?
So a number of years ago, when I was a much younger man, I would have wanted to be involved in every step of that process. I was a lot more protective of my quote unquote vision when I was younger, right? But as I've gotten a little older and I've gotten a little more experience collaborating with different artists, I have learned that there's great value in trusting the collaborative process. And this guy's a director, and he's a director for a reason. So let's trust him, right? These are actors and actresses. Let's trust them with this craft. This is something that they've studied and they've practiced a lot. And so I did not attend any rehearsals. I attended the casting session. The director and the producer wanted me at the casting, but past the casting, I didn't attend anything until opening night. And it was exhilarating.
I bet it was.
Yeah, to walk in there and experience that for the first time with the audience. It was very cool.
It's not every day that you get to see your characters actually come to life in front of your eyes.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And the female lead in that story, her name is Luna, and she's this magical creature that lives in the forest. But I remember sitting in that audition and hearing that actress read for that part, and I knew immediately, and we all knew, right? All three of us, the producer, the director, myself, we all knew it. We were like, that's Luna. And it was so strange to hear, because she's very poetic in the script. She speaks very eloquently, right? And to hear someone voice those lines in that way was just, it was like an out-of-body experience in some ways.
Was it what you heard in your head when you wrote it?
Yeah, for sure. The actress was like the perfect combination of sweet, flirty, and timid, right? It was this really weird balancing act that character was playing, and she just nailed it. It was perfect.
That's cool. That's really cool. So let's talk about your publishing journey. I always talk to authors who, or not necessarily authors, but those who want to be authors, who are interested in becoming published and trying to figure out which avenue to take. You know, should I self-publish? Should I try to find a publisher? Should I try to get an agent? What's a vanity press? How does this work, right? What was your journey like?
I wrote my first novel by accident. I still maintain that that's true. And when it was done, I thought, well, I just wrote like 73,000 words. I should probably do something with that. It seems silly to just put that in a drawer somewhere and not do anything with it. So I started to shop it around, and I think that everybody's initial understanding of publishing is pretty similar, right? We know about the big publishing houses in New York, Random House, Penguin, all these folks, right? And so that's so I started to research how to get there. So that brings me to the agent. So let's try to get an agent and do that. And I met several agents over the course of that process and pitched them my book and got several requests for the full manuscript and several rejections, right? And which is the nature of the game, right? But the agents that requested fulls would ultimately send me feedback or criticism, and it was always, this book is well written, you're a good writer, but it's kind of weird. It doesn't fit neatly into one sort of niche or genre or whatever, so I'm not sure how to sell it, and that's what it always kept coming back to. And so I became kind of neurotic about researching the publishing ecosystem and understanding the different, like you mentioned, vanity presses and self-publishing and all these things. And I really wanted to understand it on like a nuts and bolts kind of level, every aspect of it. And I became fascinated with it. And so that led me to independent publishers. I didn't want to go the self-publishing route. It's a huge undertaking to go that route and do it well, right? Because you still have to hire designers and editors and all of this stuff. So I wasn't. I was never going to be the guy that just put something out without having somebody else look at it, right? So I thought, well, if I can get an indie press, a small publisher to look at it and accept it, then we'll go that route, because at least they may not have the marketing muscle, but they at least have editors, and at least a lot of them do, right? So my first novel was published through a small press called Leopard Publishing, and they did exactly what I needed them to do. They did layout and design, and they had an editor on staff, and they looked at my book. And so I was really happy with that process, because it felt like it was organic and natural, but it also felt like I maintained creative control, right? I was able to talk to them about what I wanted the cover to look like, and I remember even going back and forth about interior font, like what fonts I wanted to use on the page and everything. So it was very, very writer friendly, right? I never lost sense of what my work was. So I decided I liked the indie route. Now, if Penguin or Random House or one of I don't even know who they are anymore, right? Because they keep buying each other. But if one of them called next week and they were like, hey, we'll give you like $5 billion for one of your books, I'm like, okay, yeah, let's do that, right?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, but I really like the indie route a lot. And I have changed publishers. I'm with Gen Z now, and my second and third books were both put out by Gen Z. And the reason that I switched was there's no bad blood. The first Snow Leopard still has my first book. I still work with them on promotion and stuff for that book. I just switched because Gen Z seems to have a little bit more marketing prowess.
That was going to be my next question. What's the marketing? Because, you can publish the book, but now we got to get it out there. And so how does the publisher, and what, when you say that, what is your responsibility and what's the responsibility of the publisher?
Yeah, so, I mean, the publisher, the Gen Z has a very good social media presence, which I like. They push their books pretty frequently. They manage sales and stuff like that, like holiday specials and these kinds of things. So it feels to me, even though they are ambitious and they do publish several titles a year, they don't lose sight of my work, right? My stuff is still a part of their focus because they're not so big that they like lose sight of their authors, right? And I have a really good relationship with them. And one of the reasons that I really like them is that I can contact, Marissa, who is the founder of Gen Z Publishing, and I can say things like, "Hey, I wrote a play. Do you guys want to look at that and maybe publish it?" And she'll be like, "Yeah, send it over." That's just a really cool working relationship. Now that I'm in there and they, I like what they do and they like what I do. It's a very nice, it's a very friendly relationship.
Yeah, that you're very fortunate. I've talked to a lot of authors who have ran into vanity presses and have paid thousands of dollars and come back with very little, if anything at all. And those who go with publishers but there's no marketing behind the book. Yeah. And that seems to be the big challenge for everybody, is how do you market the book and reach your audience? And, the goal is ultimately to sell books. So you at least want to sell one or two.
Yeah, for
right?
sure. And yeah, and we are talking right now because I have a publicist, right? And Mickey has put us in touch, and so there's still some of that stuff where I have to do a lot of the legwork because the publisher is busy publishing, and they are doing some marketing on their end, but I'm not cloudy on the fact that their primary job is publishing.
I like the fact that you have a publicist, because a lot of authors don't know what that's like. And a lot of authors I have spoke with feel that is out of range for them. It's actually not.
It's
right?
not. I went alone for a really long time and I did okay. I made a lot of connections and appeared on a lot of, shows like this and did okay. But man, when you have somebody whose full-time job it is to drum up this kind of stuff, you can't do that by yourself. I'm a teacher, right? Like I only have so many hours in a day to track down people to talk to about my book. And so, yeah, like the publicist is a huge boon to my, at least just, and I may never sell a book from like appearing on a podcast or whatever, but it really increases my visibility.
Absolutely.
And my social capital.
Absolutely. And your branding. Mm-hmm. You start to gain a following. You'll find people that like what you write. Yeah. Right? And so that's what it's all about, is trying to connect. And more than ever, I saw this article. There are I don't know how many podcasts out there. And I think COVID, we saw an uptick in things like this because we can't get together anymore, right? So this is the way that you do it. And I think it's fantastic because it gives you the opportunity to really try to maybe reach people that normally maybe wouldn't have never known about your book. Right. And I think that's great when you can make those types of connections. So let's talk about the books. There are 3 of them. Tell me, what's the first one, second one, and third one? And I was reading where you say that they're all standalones, but in the same universe, right? Mm-hmm. Tell me about that.
Yeah. Okay. So the first novel is A Year Since the Rain. And that novel was written, like I said, kind of by accident. My first publications were poems. I had some poems picked up in anthologies and stuff like that. And so I was a poet, I guess. But so I was going to write this poem. I had this great idea for a poem. It was about this breakup that I went through, and it was raining on the day that the breakup happened, right? And so I was like, it was like the 1-year anniversary. So I'm like, a year since the rain, right? It was going to be beautiful and heartbreaking. And I remember writing these great lines about how pollen was swirling in the puddles and stuff. And the poem was garbage. It was terrible. I wrote pages and pages and pages of just god-awful poetry about this terrible breakup. So I was like, all right, so maybe it's not a poem. Let's put it on the shelf. I still like the idea. We'll come back later, right? So then a little later, I started writing a short story about a town that was going through a drought. And it kind of clicked in my head. I was like, it's like maybe been a year since they had any rain, right? And so I just kept writing, and 6,000 words in, I was like, okay, so like maybe it's a little longer than a short story. Maybe I'm writing a novella. Then 15,000 words, and I'm like, okay, so it's a novel. At some point, I have to admit that this is a novel. And it's a really weird sensation to be working through that kind of process on the fly like that. Like, I sat down and really did not intend for this story to take that long to tell. And so it was really interesting. And so that book happens, and I find a publisher for it, and then it comes out. And the next step for me was that I started to become fascinated. I don't know that fascinated is the right word. Obsessed is probably a better word, with the idea of creativity and what it was that compelled me to share that story with people. Because once it's out, it is a weird feeling to have your story out there for anybody to read.
Yeah.
And so this like imposter syndrome starts to set in. Who am I to like think that anybody wants to read what I have to say and all of this? And so now I'm like facing down these questions about creativity and why I think anybody should read my stuff, which brings me to this line of questioning about the creative impulse and the compulsion that some people have to share their art. Those questions led me to my second novel, which is called The Smoke in His Eyes, a novel about artists, and a novel that I use to explore the different reasons why people make art. There are three characters that the novel focuses on. There are two musicians and a visual artist, and they all sort of have different reasons for getting into the art that they make, and they have different outcomes that they want to achieve through that art. So that's the second novel. And then The Boy Who Kissed the Rain, I said, is a short story, and then I turned that into a play. That's the most recent publication, and that's actually a prequel to the first book, to A Year Since the Rain. So they're set in the same place, but they're about different people. So you asked about the extended universe stuff, or the same universe. All of these stories stand alone. They do nod to each other, which I think is cool. They're like Easter eggs, right? But they do exist in the same story. And as you read them, and I've got two more stories or two more novels in that universe that are done, and they do tell one big story about that world. But you don't have to read any of them in any particular order for the story that you're reading to make sense. There's no overlap in characters. They're all standalone in terms of the cast of characters. They just operate in the same way, essentially. The uniting factor is this idea of muses. I call the series The World of Muses. And so there are these magical beings that populate the novels, and that's sort of the glue that holds the series together, even if they all tell separate stories.
Do the characters ever intersect with one another in a story?
So the two novels that aren't out yet that I have written, there's some overlap. There's some intersection there. Because essentially the world is sort of ending in those two novels. And so there's a big bad guy, right? Sort of my Thanos, if you will. And he exists in the next two novels. But he's the only character that exists in multiple novels. Now, yeah, there are nods. Like I said, there are nods to the other novels in each of the stories. But they are, if you hadn't read the books, you would just be like, oh, that's just a detail. But if you had read the book, you would be like, I see what you did.
Why do you think that you write fantasy? What is it about fantasy that is so compelling? Because personally, I find fantasy incredibly hard to write. But some people just can write it. And I again, I'm going to say it, I think it's fascinating to write fantasy. Yeah. But why? Why is that your genre, do you think?
So I should say up front that the fantasy that I write is what would be considered light fantasy or contemporary fantasy. It's not high fantasy like Tolkien or Game of Thrones and stuff like that. Like it is the fantasy that I write is set in our world, or at least a world very much like ours. Like one of my stories is set in Atlanta, right? So it's very much here. They're just fantastical people, or people with powers or whatever. That it's almost like comic book movie, right?
Okay.
Like these, yeah, like there are like magical people in the world, but not everybody is magical, and otherwise like everybody's just people. But with that being said, the reason that I'm drawn to this, I think, is probably twofold. First, it's I studied it a lot in college. When I was working on my master's degree, I had a professor who was very into magical realism and very into Salman Rushdie. And so I read a lot of that stuff and wrote my master's thesis on that. So I was reading a lot of magical realism, and which is like a brand of contemporary fantasy. But I think the reason that I'm drawn to it as I'm reading it is that it's a really interesting way of exploring human nature and human experience, because you take real people, like very realistic characters, and you put them up against a backdrop of something that we will never experience in real life. And so you get this like heightened sense of what it means to be human as you watch these people deal with these things that we will never necessarily have to deal with, even though it's just like a skewed version of our reality. It's the same thing that makes a show like Twilight Zone work, where you are able to explore really very real social issues, and you're almost able to do it completely free, right? Because you're masking it almost with this lens of science fiction or horror.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I think that when you just put that lens of fantasy or any genre fiction over it, it just gives you so much more freedom to explore those things.
Yeah, I would agree. So I'll ask you a question that has nothing to do with books or writing or anything, just a question that just popped into my head. Star Wars or Star Trek?
Oh, okay. Star Wars for me, honestly. Even though I absolutely understand Star Trek, like from a philosophical perspective, I think Star Trek probably gives more value. But I grew up on Star Wars. I was in a Star Wars house, so I love Star Wars. Again, original Star Wars. Can't do the new stuff. Are we gonna fight?
No, we're not. I like I am with you on the original Star Wars. Can't do the new stuff. Wasn't really impressed with, but that 1977, the best of all of them was Empire Strikes Back.
Oh,
for me.
absolutely.
Now, that was the absolute best.
I will say that Disney has done a couple of solid jobs, but that trilogy as a whole is no good.
Well, okay, I'll give Disney Rogue One.
Rogue One was good. Now,
that's all I will give.
I don't want to come to fisticuffs here, because I know I just made it into the book club.
Yeah, you just got here.
I'm already I hid this from you during the hazing, but I was a big fan of Last Jedi, and then I feel like when they brought J.J. Abrams back for the final chapter, he just really pooped the bed, for lack of a better word. But I liked Last Jedi because I think Rian Johnson was really trying to say something, right? He was trying to do something and change the outcome of this, and then everybody got upset about it, and so J.J. Abrams was like, "It's okay, guys, I'll make it right." And he did not. I guess he did make it right, but he made it garbage.
Yeah, I have to agree. But I do like Star Trek. I feel like their movies that they've come out with over the past couple of years have been very good. We could sit here and talk comic books for another 90 minutes.
That's true.
We could talk movies, and then just one more question, and we'll just see if you're really in the book club. If you are, then I can invite you to come back, but depends on how you answer the final question.
All right, I don't know.
All right. Godfather 1, 2, or 3?
Oh God. I knew that this question was going to come up because whenever we had our pre-show chat a number of weeks ago, you said that Godfather is your favorite.
absolute favorite. But 1, 2, or 3. And I'm assuming, so I'm just going to take it for granted that you've seen all 3 of them.
I have seen Godfather 1 and 2. I have not seen Godfather 3. So out of the 2 that I've seen, I stick with the original. I don't know. I enjoy Godfather 1. Maybe that's the wrong answer. Is that the wrong answer?
The wrong answer would have been 3.
Okay.
1 or 2 would have, and you hadn't seen 3, so look how you just slid in there. Congratulations.
I can't imagine. I mean, everything I've heard about 3, I can't imagine choosing it. But didn't they just release a new cut of Godfather?
They 3? Did. They re-edited it.
Any better?
A little. Well, the story makes a little more sense.
Yeah.
If you're like me, who's a big fan and have followed the story, although it's not the same story from the book, because the book is fantastic.
Yeah, I've not
read
it.
The book is absolutely fantastic. Then I followed it, and it does make more sense. I can see what he did and the story that he's trying to tell, and it does kind of bring it all together.
Was it a studio thing the first time? Did they cut it up like I'm thinking of the Zack Snyder stuff, right?
When I watched the interview with Francis Ford Coppola, that's exactly what he said. That's what the studio wanted. And at that point in time, they were really hoping for another blockbuster from 1 and from 2, right? And 3 came out much later.
I gotcha.
Much later. And when it did, he didn't have full control. Him remastering it, he got to put in what he wanted, the story that he originally told.
Yeah.
So a lot of things that probably were on the editing floor were put back into the film.
Yeah, I just need to make my office at the college darker and just have that trumpet playing whenever students come to see me, right? Like just real quiet in the background. Like, yeah.
I will tell you, it is my ringtone.
Is it? That's awesome. That is excellent.
It is my ringtone. So those who know me know, but yes, I am a Godfather fan.
That's awesome. Well, I am a co-host for a long-form movie review podcast called The Plotaholics, and we are discussing The Godfather in 2 weeks.
Anytime. Anytime. You know what? I will listen because I will be fact checking everything.
You go. Hey.
Even my kids are like, again? It's just one of my favorite movies.
Again with The Godfather?
Right? Yeah. Again? I bet you know every line, and I probably do. Yes, yeah. I do. So yeah, it is one of my favorites. So I'll be listening when you guys come out with that episode. Absolutely, because I'll definitely, anybody who wants to talk about The Godfather is okay with me.
There you go. Hey, so I'm still in the book club at least.
You're still in the book club, which means you can come back at any time. So when you come out with your new book, I do expect you to come back so that we can talk about it. Shane, thank you so much. It's been so much fun speaking with you and learning about your books and about your insight as far as being a writer. I appreciate it, and thank you for being the newest member to the book club.
Thank you. I look forward to coming back.
Right on. Thank you. Thank you for listening to another episode of Bright Headed Publishing Audiobook Book Club. I am your host, Kelly Morgan. I just wrapped up with author Shane Wilson as we talked about his 3 books, The Boy Who Kissed the Rain, A Year Since the Rain, and The Smoke in His Eyes. I truly enjoyed speaking with him. Shane, we can talk movies anytime. Definitely can't wait till he comes back to talk about his next book, and we might even have a chat about movies. Next week, another author, a new member to our book club. Thank you so much for listening, and until then, keep writing.